Welcome very much to the programme. It seems that Rishi Sunak has pretty much now ruled out any question of a referendum. Were you serious in proposing it?
Yes, I was serious, because I do believe that if we are going to be pushing forward with a policy that really I would dispute whether there is a buy-in by the wider population, whether there isn't an intrinsic dishonesty about the way we are effectively going to be unleashing the consequences of something like a net zero target by 2050 on the rest of the population when the wider debate has not been had. I do believe that a referendum would enhance transparency and accountability in the decision-making process, and it would force all bodies, including the government, to communicate the intricacies of it well in advance of that vote being had.
You haven't succeeded in persuading the Prime Minister to have a referendum, certainly not at this stage. On the other hand, it does look a little bit as though the policy is in collapse. So to that extent, it looks like you might be having success. That is to say that the Prime Minister appears to be softening up on some of the targets, coming out, expressing his support for the motorist and coming out against ULEZ zones, although ULEZ are not exactly about climate change. But you get the point.
I get the point, because forcing someone to pay £12.50 isn't going to bring emissions down. That has not happened in London, and neither do our targets, which is forcing manufacturing to effectively be offshored to other countries, namely China and the Far East and other places, which means that those manufacturing tasks are still being undertaken and carbon emissions continued. It just doesn't happen to be in our country, arguably where we would have much stronger constraints on that manufacturing process. So it's damaging British business, it's damaging British jobs, and the intrinsic dishonesty that I spoke about earlier is that actually the carbon emissions are still being pumped into the atmosphere anyway.
I wonder whether you'd like to make a comment about the quality of policymaking and the process. Because, I mean, here we have found ourselves committed to tremendously stringent targets, which have been legislated upon, which are going to lead to enormous expense for the economy and for individuals. And now people like you are making a fuss about it. But really, how was it that these policies were made and legislated with so little consideration, it seems to me, along the way?
This is an extremely good point, Michael. And, I've always respected you for being a very deep thinker and an articulate person. I remember with great fondness your nighttime shows with Andrew Neil. What I will say is that as a relatively new MP myself, being elected first in 2019, there has never been a day that has been the same as the previous one. It's been such a rocky period. So everybody has effectively come together and sometimes rush to vote for things in ways without them having been fully understood. And one does so in the faith that ministers and people within the leadership positions have actually undertaken to consider the consequences of what's being put forward to backbenchers like MPs like myself in good faith. You've described me as a rebel. Actually, there has not been, I believe, a single moment other than perhaps an abortion where it's the free vote that I am described as a rebel. I'm calling for something that has not really been had, which is really forcing a debate about the consequences of the targets being pursued as they are. And let me make this point very clear, Michael. I want a greener planet for my children and for my grandchildren. I just simply happen to disagree with the way we are going about it right now. And I think that we could look at a more pragmatic approach, and I hope the Prime Minister is considering that. And I absolutely respect the comments that some others will make, that referendums are not always the best way to achieve decisions. But it seems to me that it's the least worst option right now. We need to carry the population with us, and I think that would only happen with a wider debate, and let the arguments win out, Michael.
If I described you as a rebel, it was inadvertent, although it's not a term of abuse in my mouth. Thank you very much, Marco Longhi.